brother was signing the papers when I walked in. He didn't hear me come through the side door, the one with the broken hinge that never quite latched. And for a moment I just stood there, watching his pen move across the page in long, confident strokes, like a man who had already won. He hadn't. But he didn't know that yet. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without context, and the context is the kind of thing that takes years to understand even when you're living inside it. My grandmother, everyone called her Gran Eloise, spent 43 years building a small empire out of nothing. She came from a farming family in rural Georgia, married my grandfather at 19, and by the time I was born, she owned 3 rental properties, a small commercial building on the edge of town that she leased to a dry cleaner and a dentist's office, and the house she'd lived in since 1978, a 4-bedroom Victorian on Sycamore Hill with a wraparound porch and a garden that she tended herself until her hands wouldn't let her anymore. She was not a warm woman in the conventional sense. She didn't bake cookies or give hugs without warning. What she gave was attention. She noticed things. She noticed when I was struggling in school and quietly paid for a tutor without telling my parents. She noticed when I was interested in numbers and started bringing me along when she met with her accountant every spring. By the time I was 16, I understood compound interest, depreciation schedules, and the difference between a quitclaim deed and a warranty deed. Gran Eloise taught me that knowledge was the only thing no one could take from you without your consent. My brother Trent never sat in on those meetings. Trent was 11 years older than me, the firstborn, the one who'd gotten all the celebration and none of the expectations, which is its own particular kind of damage, I think. He was charming and funny and completely incapable of finishing anything he started. 2 years of community college, a half-built deck on the back of his house that had been half-built for 6 years, a landscaping business that lasted 1 summer. My parents thought the sun rose and set around him. Gran Eloise was the only one who saw him clearly, and she loved him anyway, which is different from pretending. His wife Coral was a different kind of problem. She'd come into the family about 8 years before all of this happened, and from the first Thanksgiving she showed up to, she had a particular way of looking at Gran Eloise's house. Not at Gran Eloise. At the house. At the hardwood floors, and the crown molding and the bay window in the dining room. She would run her fingers along the kitchen countertops when she thought no one was watching, like she was already measuring for new ones. Gran Eloise noticed. She told me once, sitting on the porch in the early evening with her sweet tea, "That woman is already spending money that isn't hers." She said it without malice. The way you'd note that rain was coming. Just a fact. I was 28 when Gran Eloise had her first stroke. It was mild, she was home within 4 days. But it changed things. She called me on a Tuesday evening, a few weeks after she got back from the hospital, and she asked me to come by alone. No parents. No Trent. When I got there, she was at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a cup of tea that had gone cold. She looked smaller than she used to. But her eyes were still exact. "I need you to help me understand something," she said. She slid the legal pad across the table. On it was a list of her assets, their estimated values, and some handwritten notes I recognized as coming from a conversation she'd had with her existing attorney, a man named Gerald Hofstede, who was 74 years old and had been handling her affairs since the Reagan administration. "Gerald says I should simplify," she said. "Put everything into a revocable trust, make distribution clear, avoid probate." "That's good advice," I said, because it was. "He's drawing up documents." She paused. "Trent and Coral came to see me last week. They want to be co-trustees." I kept my face neutral. "What did you tell them?" "I told them I'd think about it." She looked at me. "I don't want to think about it. I want to know what that means, legally, if they're co-trustees and I'm incapacitated." So I told her, clearly and completely, the way she'd always wanted information delivered. If she became incapacitated with Trent and Coral as co-trustees of a revocable trust, they would have authority to manage all trust assets, including the properties, including the commercial building, including the house on Sycamore Hill. Gran Eloise listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she said, "What would you recommend instead? A trust with a professional trustee or a trust company for asset management and a carefully chosen successor trustee who isn't someone with a financial interest in the outcome?" I hesitated. "Or a family member you actually trust?" She nodded slowly. I trust you. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded back. I'm going to call Gerald tomorrow, she said, but I want you involved from now on, every meeting, every document. I said yes. I want you to remember that moment, the kitchen table, the cold tea, the legal pad, because everything that came after flows from that night. I'm an estate paralegal. I've been one for 6 years, working at a firm in Atlanta that handles complex estate planning and probate litigation. I am not an attorney. I want to be clear about that, but I know how these documents work. I know what language is standard and what language is unusual. I know the difference between what a document says and what it does. Gran Eloise had, without fully knowing it, given her documents to exactly the right person to review. Over the next several months, Gran Eloise and I worked with Gerald to restructure her estate plan. She created a revocable living trust. She named herself as trustee while she had capacity. She named me as successor trustee. The distribution provisions were specific: the commercial building to a local historical preservation foundation she'd supported for years, the rental properties to be sold and the proceeds split equally between me and Trent, and the house on Sycamore Hill, her home, the place she'd lived for 45 years, to me. This was her choice, made clearly and documented carefully. Gerald noted in the file that she had discussed the decision with him on 3 separate occasions and was consistent each time. She wasn't angry at Trent. She just knew him. She knew the house would be sold within a year, that Coral would gut it and flip it or turn it into an Airbnb, and she did not want that. She wanted it to stay in the family in a meaningful way, and she knew I was the one who would keep it. Trent and Coral didn't know any of this. They knew she was getting her affairs in order. They assumed, because they had always assumed, that things would go the way they wanted them to go. Gran Eloise had a second stroke 14 months later. This one was worse. She spent 3 weeks in the hospital and came home to a rehab facility. She had aphasia. She could understand language but struggled to produce it. Words coming out scrambled or not at all. She knew what she wanted to say. She just couldn't always make it come out right. It was during those 3 weeks that Trent and Coral moved. I didn't find out until later how it unfolded exactly. What I pieced together from what Gran Eloise tried to tell me in fragments and what I eventually confirmed through the county recorder's office was this: Coral had found a notary, not a legitimate one, or rather, a legitimate one who was willing to be careless. A document appeared. A deed. A quitclaim deed, transferring Gran Eloise's house on Sycamore Hill to Trent and Coral as joint tenants. Signed, allegedly, by Gran Eloise. Dated 2 days before her second stroke. Recorded at the county clerk's office while she was in the ICU. I found out about the deed on a Thursday afternoon in October. I was at the county recorder's office pulling records for a probate case at work, completely unrelated, and I ran Gran Eloise's name as part of a routine sweep I'd started doing every few months since she'd gotten sick. It was habit. Paranoid habit, maybe, but habit. The deed came up in the results. I printed it and sat in my car in the parking garage for probably 20 minutes before I could think straight. The signature didn't look right. I'd seen Gran Eloise's signature on hundreds of documents over 6 years of sitting with her through her financial life. It was distinctive. She looped her capital E in a particular way, a habit from Palmer method handwriting she'd learned in the 1950s. The signature on the deed was close, but it wasn't right. It was close the way a copy is close. It has the right shape, but not the right weight. More importantly, the date. 2 days before her stroke, Gran Eloise had been at her regular cardiologist appointment in the morning, and according to what she'd told me on the phone that evening, had spent the afternoon at home resting. She had not mentioned signing anything. She was not someone who signed things without telling me anymore. We'd established that. I was her person. She told me everything. I drove directly to the rehab facility. She was in the common room watching Jeopardy when I got there, which she did every evening because the host's voice soothed her even when she couldn't follow the questions. I sat down next to her and I showed her the printout of the deed. I didn't say anything. I just put it on the table in front of her. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at me. "No," she said, which was one of the words that came out right for her, consistently. Clean and certain. No. That was enough for me. Here is what I did, and here is what I did not do. I did not call Trent. I did not call my parents. I did not call a family meeting or send an accusatory text or make a scene at the next holiday gathering. What I did was call my firm's attorney first thing the next morning, not as a client, as a colleague. I explained the situation factually. She listened and then said, "You know what you're looking at." "Deed fraud," I said, "and elder abuse under Georgia statute." "Do you want a referral?" "Yes, and I need to know if this affects the trust." It didn't, as it turned out. Or not the way Trent and Coral hoped. Because the house was already in the trust. The trust had been created and funded 18 months earlier. A property that is held in a trust cannot simply be transferred by a quitclaim deed signed by the grantor. The grantor isn't the owner anymore in the relevant sense. The trustee is. And the trustee was Gran Eloise. And Gran Eloise had not signed anything. What the deed actually demonstrated was that Trent and Coral either didn't know the house was in the trust, which showed they hadn't done their homework, or they knew and were hoping no one would notice the legal impossibility before they could muddy the waters enough to make it work. Either way, the deed was void, legally and practically. But fraud is fraud and elder abuse is elder abuse, and I was not going to let it pass. I hired an attorney. I filed a complaint with the county sheriff's office. I hired a forensic document examiner, a retired FBI analyst who now worked privately, who examined the deed signature and provided a written opinion that it was inconsistent with Gran Eloise's known exemplars. I pulled Gran Eloise's cardiologist records for that date, which confirmed she had been seen in the office that morning and had been given a medication adjustment that her doctor had specifically told her would make her fatigued. She was instructed to go home and rest, and not to drive or engage in any taxing activities. The notary, when contacted by the sheriff's investigator, said she had notarized the document in good faith. She said a woman matching Gran Eloise's description had come in with her family. She said the woman seemed a little quiet but had nodded when asked if she was signing of her own free will. A woman who was fatigued from a medication adjustment, who had aphasia that made it hard to say no clearly even when she meant it, brought in by her son and daughter-in-law to sign a document she may not have understood. That is called undue influence. That is also elder abuse. My parents did not take it well when they found out. Not the part about the fraud. They couldn't really argue with a forensic document examiner and a void deed. What they couldn't accept was that I had done all of it without telling them first. My mother called me and cried. Not for Gran Eloise. For Trent. "He's your brother," she said. "I know," I said. "This will destroy him. Coral will leave him if he goes to jail." "Mom," I said as gently as I could manage, "he helped forge Grandma's signature while she was in the hospital after a stroke." There was a long silence on the phone. "She was always going to leave you the house," my mother finally said. "That isn't fair." And there it was, the real thing underneath everything. It wasn't just about Trent. It was about all of it. The years of Gran Eloise choosing me to sit in those meetings, choosing me to understand her finances, choosing me to be her person when she got sick. My mother had always thought that was a slight against the rest of them. An accusation dressed up as preference. Gran Eloise loved Trent, I said. She left him half the proceeds from the rental properties. That's real money. "It's not the house." "No," I said, "it's not, because she didn't want the house sold." My mother hung up. The criminal investigation moved slowly, the way these things do. But the civil side moved faster. Trent and Coral had, at this point, hired an attorney of their own, a guy who seemed to specialize in the specific brand of aggressive optimism that comes from knowing your client is probably guilty, but charging ahead anyway. He sent letters. He argued the deed was valid. He argued Gran Eloise had capacity. He said we were the ones pressuring an old woman. We let him argue. We had the document examiner's report. We had the cardiologist's records. We had Gran Eloise herself, who sat across from Trent's attorney at a deposition and, slowly and painstakingly, answered every question he asked her with the particular precision of a woman who knew exactly what had been done to her and was not going to pretend otherwise. She managed 4 words at the end of the deposition that came out in the right order. "He is my son." She didn't say it like a defense of him. She said it like an indictment. Trent's attorney settled 2 weeks later. The deed was formally declared void by the court. Trent agreed to a civil judgment acknowledging the fraud. The criminal case resulted in Coral pleading guilty to 1 count of elder financial exploitation, a felony under Georgia law, and receiving 3 years probation and a fine. Trent pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge as a lesser included offense and received probation and community service. Coral did not leave him. I don't know if that makes the situation better or worse. Gran Eloise passed away the following spring, 8 months after the settlement. She died in the house on Sycamore Hill, in the bedroom she'd slept in for 45 years, with the window cracked because she always slept with the window cracked even in winter. I was there. My parents were there. Trent was there, standing near the door with his hands in his pockets, and she looked at him once near the end, and whatever passed between them, I didn't try to interpret. The trust settled without dispute. The commercial building went to the historical foundation. The rental property sold and the proceeds were split. The house came to me as she'd planned. I live in it now. I kept a garden. Badly, I'm not as good at it as she was, and I've killed 2 of her rose bushes through a combination of overwatering and optimism. I kept the wraparound porch. I kept the broken hinge on the side door, actually, because I couldn't bring myself to fix it right away, and now I've waited so long it's just part of the house. Some nights I sit on the porch with a glass of sweet tea that I make wrong, not sweet enough, not cold enough. And I think about the fact that she spent 43 years building something, and the people who were supposed to love her almost took it apart in an afternoon with a forged signature and a careless notary. I think about my mother saying it wasn't fair that Gran Eloise chose me, and I think, not with anger anymore, mostly with something more tired than anger, that Gran Eloise didn't choose me because she loved me more. She chose me because she knew I would pay attention. She knew I would sit in the meetings and read the documents and notice when something was wrong. She chose me because she knew I would keep the house. She was right. Last month I finally fixed the side door hinge. It latches now, clean and quiet every time. I stood there in the doorway for a moment after I finished, testing it, and I thought, Gran Eloise would have noticed that I finally did it. She noticed everything. I like to think she's still noticing. I keep coming back to the moment in the parking garage, the printed deed in my hand, the signature that was almost right but not quite. Almost. That one word does a lot of work when you're talking about fraud. Almost right means wrong, and wrong in a legal document means everything. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty, about pressing charges, about the fact that Trent has a felony-adjacent record now, that Coral has a conviction, that my mother still goes quiet when my name comes up at family dinners I'm no longer invited to, and I think about that question honestly, the way Gran Eloise would have wanted me to, not looking for the comfortable answer, but the true one. I don't feel guilty, but I don't feel triumphant either. What I feel is something closer to tired, and underneath the tired, something that might be called clear. Here's what I've come to understand about what happened, and I'm not talking about the legal mechanics of it, I mean the deeper machinery. Trent and Coral didn't fail because they got caught. They failed because of the choices they made long before they ever found that notary. Every decision that led to a forged signature on a quitclaim deed was a choice made by people who had practiced, for years, the habit of taking without earning, of assuming without asking, of treating other people's lives, Gran Eloise's life, her 43 years of careful building, as a resource to be harvested rather than a story to be respected. That catches up with you, not because the universe is keeping score in some mystical ledger, but because the person you become through those habits is not someone equipped to handle the moments that actually matter. When it counted, Trent didn't have the judgment to know what he was doing was wrong, or the courage to stop, or the wisdom to understand that what Gran Eloise had built wasn't really about the money. Gran Eloise taught me the opposite of that. Not in lectures. She wasn't a lecture kind of woman. She taught me by letting me sit across the table from her and watch how she thought, how she asked questions before she acted, how she was honest about what she knew and what she didn't, how she kept her word consistently over decades until her word was worth something real. That's what I tried to carry into the investigation. Not anger. Anger would have made me sloppy. I needed to be precise. I needed to be the person who pulled records on a Thursday afternoon out of habit, who noticed the wrong loop on a capital E, who understood that a property held in trust cannot be transferred by quitclaim. I needed to have paid attention, for years, before any of this happened. And I had. Because she taught me to. There's something in that I think about a lot now. The way integrity is less a decision you make in a crisis and more a practice you build in the ordinary moments. The Tuesday evenings at a kitchen table, the annual meetings with an accountant, the habit of reading documents carefully, even when nothing seems wrong. You don't know which of those ordinary moments is preparing you for something. You just keep doing the work. Trent thought the house was about square footage and real estate value. Gran Eloise knew it was about something that can't be forged. I think, finally, so do I.